Hey guys, Dov here, and today I wanted to break from the Unit Highlight series to talk about a topic that's been on my mind recently as I write a multiplayer DLC guide for all of the many DLCs for Warhammer 1 and 2. I had the question and I had a discussion with some people, what's the best faction if you can't afford any DLC and all you have is Total War Warhammer 2? And by far and away, my opinion, and this was backed up by many other people, is Lizardmen. Lizardmen have a lot of really strong tools that you don't need DLC to get access to. So quickly, I'm going to do something I don't normally do and just quickly pause here as I kind of talk in depth about this build. We've got Mazdamundi here, one of the best caster monster lords in the game. He is very expensive, so I've kind of kitted him down a little bit here. I do expect potentially expensive flying units in this matchup. Rider Rohan here did not take any, but I've got Greater Arcane Conduit, this missile resistance, of course, Cold-Blooded, which you can't not take, Harmonic Convergence, and Apotheosis is going to give me some extra stats and healing, and those are the only two spells I have just to focus all of my Greater Arcane Conduit onto them. Shield of the Old Ones gives extra leadership damage resistance, and Banishment gives me some nice AoE anti-infantry ability. Speaking of anti-infantry, he himself, of course, is an anti-infantry monster. We've also got this Pharaoh Stegadon here, with probably one of the best, cheapest monsters in the game. It does have 3 chevrons, just because I had some leftover points. Decided they would be best spent on this single entity since he's not going to lose models. Got a Skink Chief on foot as well for that extra cold-blooded and just extra missile attack. Solar Engine, probably the best monster artillery in the game, right now at least, because of that super strong blinded contact effect. Some cohorts up front, a few Javelin Skinks for a little bit of range support, and 2 Saurus Warriors for a nice backline. I've also got 2 Cold One Riders, excellent cost-effective armor-piercing cavalry, melee cavalry, not necessarily shock cavalry, but super cost-effective for their price, and of course the 3 Pterodons, which are currently flying over to do a drop rocks on these Everqueen's Court Guards, and they are paying a pretty hefty price, but I mean, even like a half contact of one of these units on the Everqueen's Court Guards is still probably cost-effective. Same thing on these Talons of Torquelada here. If we can get good drop rocks on them, these Pterodons will basically pay for themselves instantly. So I don't even have to worry about skirmishing with them too much, but they still will be useful, of course, into the late game. But here, I've kind of got a lot of bases covered. Now, you might think there's a lack of anti-large in this build, and that is true, but essentially my plan, if he brought like a Star Dragon or something, was to hit him with the blinded effect and then try and cycle charge him as much as possible with the Stegadons. Stegadons do have 70 plus charge bonus depending on the variant, and it's quite strong here. So yeah, just getting the rush going. I do make a little bit of a tactical error here. These Skink Javelins come forward to throw their Javelins at the Swordmasters, but end up kind of in combat against these Spearmen a little bit here. But yeah, right now the Everqueen's Court Guards, despite taking some pretty horrendous losses to, you know, the drop rocks and everything, are still online. I've also had the Solar Engine focused on them the whole time. I don't necessarily need its melee effect against any of these units right now, and I'm just more worried about these armor-piercing missiles going after Mazdamundi. And speaking of armor-piercing, these cavalry out here do get an engagement. Silverhelms actually get a pretty solid charge there. And in an open engagement, Silverhelms, if they got the charge, probably win, but I'm going to throw an Apotheosis over there to try and sustain this Cold One Rider, and once the shock of the charge bonus wears off in the sustained combat, these Cold One Riders will be able to trade decently well because of that armor-piercing damage. They do have marked less stats, something to be aware of, but kind of reformed my Javelin line here. They're ready to roll. Saurus and Skinks are basically mostly in combat now. Yeah, Saurus are over there. Saurus holding line here as well. Mazdamundi is taking a lot of damage, though. I have to be careful. He's got a lot of HP, but you don't want him getting caught out in a position where he's going to take a ton of armor-piercing missile damage. That's his main downside, and he's not the strongest melee combatant in the world. I mean, he does have a lot of HP, the ability to heal himself and boost his own or someone else's stats with that harmonic convergence, but he still will fall over to a top-tier combatant if given enough time. Here, you can see I'm swarming these Swordmasters. I get in with the Pterodons just to tie them down, and then this Feral Stegadon's going to charge over. Stegadon in general, I'm just kind of ping-ponging him around, like kind of charging him into different units, right? Like I'll charge him here, and then rear charge him into these spears, and maybe side charge him into these Lothan Sea Guard, and, you know, I don't want to be front charging into spears if I can avoid it, but rear charging spears, totally fine. Given the Stegodon's armor, 110 armor there, won't take too much damage at all. It wasn't very expensive for me to take in the first place. But the Solar Engine kind of gets caught up in combat a little bit here. The Silver Helms end up mostly trading with the Cold One Riders, which is actually cost effective for me, right? Because mine are 150, are what? I guess only 50 points cheaper. These are non-shielded Silver Helms, so it's barely cost effective, but it is cost effective. It does allow me to get rid of his cavalry element, or at least answer it decently well. Mazdamundi continuing to tank and heal here. Shield the Old Ones will help resist a little bit more of that damage. He has taken a lot of damage here, but let's see. How much have we been able to regenerate, just out of curiosity? About 1,000 HP so far regenerated. Another banishment goes down. Earlier we had hit the Swordmasters with it. Didn't do too much. Doesn't do too much there as well, but every little bit counts. And just forcing Rider of Rohan to move these Lothran Sea Guards so they can't keep shooting for free is also nice. Alariel now is the subject, or Teclis rather, not Alariel, is the subject of the Solar Engine. He will take a lot of damage because he doesn't have much armor. Likewise, Mazdamundi with his massive charge bonus just comes in and blasts Teclis. Teclis can take his own monster mount now, but Mazdamundi still is probably a better combatant. He's much slower, obviously, but just way more HP. Teclis flying around on his dumb bird can be very hard to kill, but also isn't as impactful in the melee fight as this giant, thick monster of Mazdamundi. Skink's fighting in the front line. The Chief still supporting leadership. Honestly, hasn't been in a position. I haven't been positioning him super well to use his ammo, but he's not very expensive, so it's not really a priority for my micro. But how about these Swordmasters, despite getting completely pounded by two Stegodons the whole time, have been able to fight quite well here, and it looks like they might have got a regrowth at one point. They are a little bit into their healing cap. Let's see, can I actually get the card to stay as I look at that? Let's see. Yeah, they definitely got some healing there, no doubt about it. They are eventually able to finish off the Saurus Warriors with shields, and 61 kills, almost an XP chevron as well. Teclis calls in a Fiery Convocation that's going to force my skinks somewhat to move. I mean, they are pretty cheap skinks, and I've used all the javelins at this point anyway. But we'll try and get them in combat here to support Mazdamundi, Pterodons, and skinks just chasing off routing archer units, and Teclis getting aimed down sights. Yes, that's a verb. By the Solar Engine here. Blasts him. Does a lot of damage, and without that Potion of Troy active, he is yeah, out of there. Potion of Troy does pop, but unfortunately, so does army losses. So, thanks to Rider of Rohan for playing games. He actually pays for this, for me to watch his games and help him out, of course, and also play some games with him, help him practice. I do have training available on my Patreon for those of you guys interested. But anyway, Lizardmen, yeah, you can take builds like this that are very strong and require no DLC units whatsoever. There's no RORs here. There's nothing that's gated behind any DLC. This is all just pure Lizardmen. And there's other things you can do here as well, not just limited to Mazdamundi, but we'll talk about that in a moment. Yeah, Teclis, Silver and Guard did a decent job. So, Silver Helms, again, kind of traded more or less for my Cold One Riders, so I would say that's pretty effective for me. The Swordmaster's not quite able to pick up that XP chevron, but just me being able to disrupt his archer line with the Pterodons, get that initial early drop rocks, and then come in, tank damage on Mazdamundi, and kind of spread it between him and this Stegodon here, it ended up being very effective. And that's kind of the thing, is because you have these very cost-effective monsters to bring as Lizardmen, you don't necessarily have to go for the very expensive ones. And you just, it's a very, very strong, kind of complete faction as it is. They are pretty monster-focused, and they're somewhat vulnerable to the highest-tier armor-piercing missile factions. Even then, like, Dwarfs are doable. Skaven and Coast are probably the hardest, I would say. But again, you can do some things, potentially, in those matchups, or just ban them if you know, are in a tournament setting or something. But in terms of non-DLC stuff, I probably should have turned off all my DLC before recording this, but you've got Gorok is free LC, right? So you've got Gorok. Of course, Krokar is a decent legendary lord as well, but really the power comes from these Slaawn lords here. All the Slon Lords are very potent. I mean, I guess depending on the Winds of Magic, but in particular, obviously, Lore of Life with healing dinos can be ridiculously strong. Mazdamundi himself has some healing, not as much as Lore of Life, but he himself is also a monster and can give some really nice buffs and AoE damage, more so than a regular Slon. I mean, all Slons have Banishment. He also has Ruination of Cities, of course. So the Slon Lords definitely put him over the top, but even the Saurus Old Blood, very, very good choice. Has this Horn of Kygor that is excellent for supporting any lizard units, a lot of Saurus units especially that have lower attack, a high weapon strength. It's great for them. He has this damage resistance item to try and tank damage as well for 18 seconds, which is nice if you get caught. Decent defense buffs as well, stand your ground there, Foe Seeker. You've also got these heroes, right? All these heroes. Skink Chief, which is fantastic on basically all of his mounts. But especially on foot, only 350 points, and he's still got cold-blooded, nice poison missiles. The Scarvet can be a nice either infantry, cavalry, or monster anti-large character, which has, Frenzy does not enrage. I guess Frenzy is only for the Carnosaur, right? But yeah, also has Potion of Strength, potentially. This Plaque of Domination, also quite strong situationally against certain factions that have low leadership. And of course, 2 generic casters as well, with Lore of Mantcores, which is one of the strongest lores in the game, and Lore of Heavens, which is probably one of the most underrated lores in the game. Both very good. For your non-DLC units, you can cut the Red Crest, but all the rest of these infantry are available. Saurus are quite solid. Skinks are not amazing, but they are very fast. They're not amazing in combat, I should say. Lowish leadership, but they are very fast. Saurus are decent in combat, not the best attack and defense, but massive weapon strength. Just good leadership and very solid mass as well. You got pretty good missiles. Chameleon Skinks are very hard to return fire on and excellent poison. They also have a great rate of fire and do surprisingly a lot of damage. You've got these cavalry here, like I mentioned, the very cost-effective armor-piercing cavalry, even an anti-large variant, which is a little bit less cost-effective maybe, but both very good. Pterodons, probably the best flying missile unit in the game. I'm going to go ahead and say that here, even though I will probably make a separate video about Pterodon Rider specifically, but the Drop Rocks in particular is a massive damage burst spike that if you can time it and line it up right, super strong. Not only that, but as I've mentioned many times in this series, poison missiles are fantastic, which the Lizardmen, like everything has poison missiles, right? Like these guys have poison missiles. I mean, I guess not all the Howdas, but like the Stegodon, this Stegodon, he's got armor-piercing, he's got an armor-piercing ballista, right? And plus armor-piercing jabs off the back. Likewise, Ancient Stegodon's got armor-piercing jabs off the back. The Ark of Sotek literally poops poison and also has poison jabs on the back, as does the Rev Crystal. You've also got Feral Carnosaur, which is a super cost-effective, considering that you can heal it. It's a very cost-effective, fast, hard-hitting, kind of top-tier monster. Yeah, I mean, Crocscore's solid anti-infantry unit as well. You've got one of the cheapest terror units in the game at the Feral Stegodon. So there's that. Not to mention, of course, solar engines, like I mentioned, one of the best monster artillery in the game. Can also pair them with a Fire Slon if you want to have all of the fun and get tons of Kindle Flame procs and synergize strongly there. Let's also appreciate the fact that you've got a caster with Greater Arcane Conduit who can go Flamestorm plus Banishment plus, fire, just all damage, right? Just all of the burning and fire and damage, death magic. Unfortunately, we don't have a Death Slon yet. I am really hoping at some point in the future, Creative Assembly adds, metal, death, and shadows for the Slons. I really think they should be, they should have those lores of magic. But as it is right now, Lizardmen, definitely, I would say, if you can't afford DLC, you want to jump into multiplayer, Lizardmen are the faction for you. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed. If you like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. You know the drill. Give it a share. Much appreciated. We'll see you next time.